Particularly, you have to remember that when Mr. Trump imposed these tariffs on the Chinese, that the Democrat side of the House screamed bloody murder, saying it was going to destroy the economy, cost American jobs, raise prices, etc. Well, you notice that once Mr. Biden took office, that he kept almost all of what Mr. Trump imposed. So I expect these will continue. And really the test, when you look at the effectiveness of tariffs, and experts can debate this all day, and depending on what your position is, you can always find a lobbyist or a lawyer to give you the position you want, the answer you want. But the thing to remember is to look at the Chinese response. Look at the Communist Chinese Party's response when tariffs were applied, and they don't like it. And even now, they complain bitterly. Xi Jinping has even mentioned this point with President Biden when they've actually met in person. So the reaction of the Chinese Communist Party should tell you that they don't like having tariffs put on them, thus reasonably assumes they're effective at what they're intended to do. What you're dealing with the PRC is not a normal economy. It's not a normal country. It plays by none of the rules that any of the other major countries have agreed to and play by. So you really have to do some pretty drastic things if you're going to get their attention. And that's really what tariffs are in this case, is it's almost an act of desperation at a country which is not played by any of the regulatory rules, the agreement that they made when they got into the World Trade Organization, and will not stop funding and subsidizing their own companies, which are state-owned companies financed by the government. They get all sorts of benefits, such as tax benefits, free land, direct financial contribution subsidies, that it's not a normal economy, as I said, where the usual rules apply. So you have got to hit them pretty hard with tariffs. And I say it's almost the last step. You almost have nothing else to do. So this is trying to get China's attention, and in the hopes that they will sort of behave better, but I don't really know how effective it's going to be overall. Particularly because the Chinese economy is floundering. It needs to export to earn convertible currency, since the Chinese currency is not freely usable overseas. And thus it has really revved up its manufacturing sector.
And as you know, Colonel, the Biden administration has put pressure on China over its overcapacity in certain sectors like solar panels. Can you explain to us what that is and how it has impacted the U.S. and Americans?
Well, what it's done, just taking the green energy sort of field, is China has been able to, through the use of subsidies and sort of state-backed companies, offer products at such a low price that American, European, Canadian manufacturers can't compete. They've gone out of business. And that's why China has such dominance in these industries. And supposedly the industries of the future, we'll find out about that. But nonetheless, the administration and other governments are prioritizing sort of green energy development. And China's use of trade is part of their economic warfare scheme. And this is warfare very much. It seeks to sort of destroy your business opponents, but also to cripple your military opponents, which is how the Chinese see it, because they simply don't have any manufacturing anymore in these industries. And that is something that puts the American people, American consumers, citizens, at risk when you are this dependent on an enemy.
All right, Colonel Newsham, thank you very much for the discussion today.
Well, thank you.
From any theater that agreed to play the film. It also threatened the safety of theater staff. Several Taiwanese lawmakers and politicians said the situation shocked them. The screenings went smoothly despite the challenges. State organs had entered the Oscar race for 2025 and has screened at theaters in New York and New Jersey. One of the most important U.S. allies in Asia just got a new prime minister. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba is putting together a stimulus package to support his country's economy and express his stance on China. Here's a closer look at the details.
The new Prime Minister was only sworn in this week and had previously been seen as a supporter of fiscal austerity. But he now stresses his new government's top priority is to exit deflation that has weighed down the country for 3 decades. He also vowed Friday to keep building ties with like-minded nations, including deeper security cooperation with South Korea. He said he would work with China where possible while confronting it on issues of disagreement.
Japan's new leader pledging to stick to its alliance with the U.S. Friday to defend against threats from China, Russia, and North Korea. He said the country is facing the most tense security environment since World War II, adding there's a need to bolster Japan's military.
Violation of Japanese airspace by Chinese and Russian warplanes have been observed. This is a serious violation of sovereignty, North Korea's advancement of missile technology and repeated firings more often than ever, on top of developing long-range missiles.
He told President Biden that he wants to strengthen the alliance on Wednesday, though he stopped short of talking about establishing a NATO-like alliance in Asia, an idea he previously advocated for. NATO is the world's most powerful military alliance. Japan's foreign minister said an Asian version of a NATO is a possibility in the future. A senior U.S. Treasury official, Brent Naiman, said the International Monetary Fund is, in his words, too polite when it comes to criticizing China's economic policies. He believes the IMF should be more direct and transparent, especially about the loans China gives to other countries. Naiman urged the IMF to push China for more clarity about its lending terms. Don Ma with NTD Newsroom discussed this with E.J. Antoni. He's a research fellow at the Heritage Foundation.
EJ, thank you so much for coming on today. So Naiman raised concerns about China giving out loans. He urged the IMF to push China for more clarity about its lending terms. I was wondering if you could explain to us China's practice of making emergency loans to debt-ridden countries and Naiman's concerns here.
Certainly, this is essentially the practice of a loan shark just on the international stage. What China is basically doing here is going to very vulnerable debtor nations and bailing them out, but using terms that are essentially going to enslave those nations in terms of debt to China ad infinitum. So there will typically be no way for these nations to ever get out from under the thumb of the influence of the Chinese Communist Party. Again, it's very much like the way a loan shark can ensnare an individual into a kind of debt slavery at the individual level, but this is just being done at the international level.
Can you tell us how China is exploiting some of these debt-ridden countries? What are they doing to these countries?
Well, it works very similar to when a person, let's say, takes out a credit card and the credit card starts with a 0% interest rate for a period of time. And there is an incentive for you to go out and spend a lot of money on that card and rack up your balance in the hopes that you can pay off that balance before the very punishingly high interest rates eventually kick in. And what ends up happening for a lot of unfortunate folks is that they can't actually pay off all of that debt, and now they're stuck making those very high interest payments to that creditor, to the bank. In the case of China, very oftentimes what they do is they make countries promise things in the future. So today they get a lot of handouts, maybe some infrastructure development from the Chinese Communist Party, but then in the future they have to pay a punishingly high penalty. Sometimes that essentially requires these nations to hand over a tremendous amount of their natural resources, for example.
So the Treasury official highlighted this point as well, that some of the loans don't always appear on the balance sheet of the borrowing nation. Can you speak to the impact of this lack of transparency?
Well, it makes it very difficult for other nations to have any kind of confidence when they have to interact with these debtor nations to China, and especially in terms of international trade, because when you can't be sure of if your trading partner, let's say, is in some kind of financial predicament, you are very less likely, I should say, to want to trade with those people or want to have any kind of financial interaction at all, even if you're not necessarily trading products.
What needs to be done to push for greater transparency from China regarding its lending practices?
Well, one of the ways that has so far proven very successful in terms of dealing with China and trying to get them to not be such bad actors on the world stage in a lot of different matters, frankly, has been tariffs and non-tariff penalties on Chinese trade. Again, that has proven to be particularly successful in the United States under the Trump administration. They did a very, very good job of strategically placing those tariffs on certain products and in such a way that it essentially compelled the Chinese Communist Party to stop being such a bad actor on the world stage, to stop undermining American manufacturing, let's say.
But I've noticed that every time a country, places tariffs on China, the country always comes back with a retaliatory measure. I mean, does that deter certain countries from wanting to impose tariffs on China?
Well, it depends on the trading partner with the Chinese in large part. In the case of the United States, we buy so much from China and they buy relatively little from us. It also depends on the alternatives that nations have. And this goes back to the strategic way in which the Trump administration placed tariffs on the Chinese Communist Party. And essentially what they did was they focused on things which American purchasers would have alternative choices. So instead of buying steel from China, they could buy steel from Sweden, let's say, for only a little bit more. That meant that the Chinese steel producer, who was already heavily subsidized by the government there, the Chinese steel producer had to essentially eat the cost of that tariff, because if they raised prices any more than just a little bit, Americans would just buy the Swedish steel instead of the Chinese steel. So again, it goes back to it being a very case-by-case basis, not only country by country, but also individual product by product.
All right, EJ, terrific insight today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.